Sometimes it takes just one moment, one decision to change lives forever. A call that seems trivial, a glance filled with assumptions, and in the next breath, everything shifts. This is the story of Delilah, a woman whose fear led to an irreversible choice, and Amara, a mother whose strength was tested by that very choice. What happens when suspicion meets innocence? When a fleeting judgment leaves ripples that touch an entire community? Imagine a quiet, sunlit afternoon at the park. Laughter fills the air, children running in carefree circles. Amid the warmth, there's Delilah, poised, observing a mixture of concern and weariness written across her face. To most, she seems composed, the type who knows what's best. But behind that calm exterior, a storm of guarded beliefs and shadowed assumptions, passed down like heirlooms from generations before. Now, picture Amara. Her eyes, a window to her boundless love and unyielding strength. She's playing with her son, Elliot, a boy with an infectious laugh that could brighten the darkest corners. Elliot's innocent smile speaks of trust, of knowing he's safe with the mother who would move mountains for him. Their bond, an unspoken testament to the battles fought and won, the whispered challenges of raising a child whose roots cross boundaries others refuse to see. Delilah's gaze sharpens. There's a moment, brief yet potent, where doubt seeps in. A tilt of the head, a fleeting suspicion like a match striking the edge. What if? Stay with me, because what unfolds next will have you questioning everything you thought you knew about perception, about the power of a single choice. If you're ready for a story full of unexpected turns and powerful lessons, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button. You won't want to miss what comes next. But first, let's step into Delilah's world, a world where past whispers still echo, shaping her every move. Watch closely as she interacts with neighbors and friends, small, seemingly harmless remarks that carry weight. Notice the subtle glances, the quiet judgments that slip into the spaces between words. And now, look again at Amara, a mother whose days are woven with challenges most can't fathom, who has learned to smile through stares and brush off well meaning but intrusive questions. A mother who finds solace in every laugh Elliot gives her, knowing he's loved beyond measure. Do you think one person's perspective can shift the entire course of a community? Let's find out. But first, don't forget to subscribe for more stories that spark thought and reflection. The park was alive with the vibrant energy of a sunny afternoon. Children's laughter mixed with the distant hum of city sounds. Birds chirped, fluttering from branch to branch, drawing curious eyes skyward. Amara's voice rang out, filled with warmth as she called to Elliot, lifting him up so he could see a bright blue jay perched above them. Elliot's giggle was pure joy, echoing through the playground like music. Delilah sat on a nearby bench, her book barely open, eyes trained on the scene unfolding across the grass. Her chest tightened, a strange feeling, a gnawing doubt she couldn't quite place. She glanced to her side, catching the eye of Mavis, her longtime friend and confidant. Mavis's brow arched as if reading Delilah's unease. "Do you see that?" Delilah whispered, leaning in, her voice low but urgent. Mavis followed her gaze, unsure, the moment hanging heavy between them. Delilah's fingers curled around her phone, the chill of it pressing against her palm. Seconds stretched, heavy with indecision. Before we dive into what Delilah does next, remember to hit that subscribe button so you're always updated with stories that keep you on the edge of your seat. With a sudden resolve, Delilah's thumb hovered, then pressed down. A voice on the other end answered, formal and detached. "There's something suspicious happening at the park," she murmured, eyes locked on Amara and Elliot. The call set off a ripple that would soon swell into a wave. The hum of sirens cut through the chatter, sharp and jarring. Heads turned, the light-hearted atmosphere shifting into a nervous tension. The uniformed officers arrived, stepping into the scene with brisk authority. Amara felt the air grow dense around her, her smile faltering as she set Elliot down gently. "Ma'am, is everything okay?" The officer's tone was neutral, but the weight of their presence said otherwise. Amara's hands shook imperceptibly as she pulled Elliot close. His wide eyes flicked between the adults, sensing the change but not understanding it. "I, yes, officer, we're just playing," Amara replied, her voice steady but edged with the effort it took to stay calm. Behind her, whispers spread like wildfire through the gathering crowd. Some glanced at Delilah, others at Amara, expressions split between confusion, concern, and judgment. Mavis shifted uneasily, her eyes darting between Delilah and the officers. A neighbor named Jonas crossed his arms, his brow furrowed as he watched the scene play out. "This doesn't seem right," he muttered under his breath, just loud enough for the woman next to him, Lydia, to nod in silent agreement. But others, like Mr. Harding, an elderly man known for his curt remarks, shook his head in quiet approval of Delilah's actions. The crowd grew, opinions forming without facts, alliances shifting in a matter of moments. Some stood with arms crossed, believing the worst of Amara without knowing her story. Others whispered among themselves, eyes flicking to Delilah, questioning her intent. Amara's heart pounded, every second stretching into an eternity as she tried to reassure Elliot, now clinging to her leg. The officers exchanged glances, one of them stepping forward, voice softer this time. "Ma'am, could we talk over here for a moment?" The world seemed to pause, caught in the throes of judgment and tension. Delilah's memories took her back to a small, sleepy town where everything and everyone looked the same. The streets were lined with neat, white picket fences, and the neighbors all knew each other's names. Her father, Walter, was a stern man with opinions as rigid as the old oak tree in their yard. "Remember, Delilah," he would say, "people like us stick with people like us." It was a mantra woven into her childhood, repeated so often it became an unquestioned truth. There were moments, however, that whispered doubt into Delilah's mind. Like the day a boy named Caleb, a classmate who lived on the wrong side of town, helped her when she'd fallen off her bike. His kindness was brief, gone as soon as her father arrived, face hard and unyielding. The cold way Walter pulled her away from Caleb stuck with her, planting a seed of confusion that Delilah had buried deep, never letting it see the light. Amara's journey began in a crowded adoption agency, where she first met a bright-eyed boy who stole her heart. Elliot's laughter had cut through the noise, sparking a connection that felt like destiny. But the path wasn't smooth. Amara, facing raised eyebrows and probing questions, had fought hard for her right to become Elliot's mother. She navigated doubts from strangers and even some friends who couldn't understand why she, a single black woman, would adopt a child whose pale skin drew curious stares. Despite it all, Amara had stood firm, a fortress of love and unwavering commitment. Every bedtime story, scraped knee, and shared joke had strengthened the bond between them, making them inseparable. Liking this story so far? Show your support by subscribing. It fuels our inspiration to bring you more content like this. Back to the park. A voice pierced through the tense air, shaky but defiant. "Uncle Finn?" Elliot cried, his small arms waving. The crowd shifted as a tall man pushed his way to the front. Finn, known in the community for his volunteer work and easy smile, knelt and scooped Elliot into a hug. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Recognition dawned in some eyes, confusion in others. Delilah's chest tightened as Finn's gaze met hers, disappointment etched across his face. It was a look she'd seen before, but this time it struck like a blow. Finn turned to the officers. "This is my nephew," he said, voice steady. "Is there a problem here?" The murmurs grew, changing tone. Jonas stepped forward, a note of apology in his voice as he addressed Amara. "We didn't know. We're sorry." Mavis stood back, her mouth opening and closing as realization dawned. The certainty she'd clung to just moments ago now felt flimsy, fragile. She glanced at Delilah, whose eyes glistened, torn between stubborn pride and a shame she couldn't yet name. The crowd, once divided, now bubbled with questions and guilt. Conversations sparked, full of uncertainty and shifting opinions. Mr. Harding shuffled his feet, muttering, "Did we act too fast?" Lydia, who had watched everything unfold, nodded slowly, a thoughtful expression replacing her earlier frown. Mavis turned to Delilah, her voice soft and trembling. Maybe we were wrong." The tension between them hung in the air, charged with the weight of their shared assumptions. Elliot's voice cut through the noise, quivering yet resolute. "Uncle Finn." He clung tightly to the familiar figure, eyes wide with confusion and fear. The crowd seemed to freeze, their collective attention snapping to Finn, who stood protectively in front of Amara and Elliot. Finn, usually seen with a gentle smile, now wore a serious expression. He glanced at Amara, who offered him a small, grateful nod, then turned his eyes to the police officers. His voice, calm but with an edge of authority, echoed, "Officers, this is my nephew and his mother. There's no issue here." A murmur rippled through the crowd, confusion and recognition mixing like currents. People exchanged glances, some embarrassed, others defensive. Delilah's face flushed as a knot of tension twisted in her chest. The whispers around her were no longer fuel for her beliefs. They stung like a harsh wind, cold and relentless. Do I deserve that subscription yet? If this story has kept you hooked, make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Mavis, standing close to Delilah, felt her convictions waver. She replayed the scene in her mind, the call, the assumptions, the stares, and felt something crack within her. With a heavy breath, she turned to Delilah, searching for the solidarity they'd shared just moments before. But Delilah's expression was distant, eyes fixed on Finn as if seeing him for the first time. Did we? Mavis started, but her voice faltered. The air between them was thick with unspoken questions, regrets surfacing in their silence. Around them, pockets of the crowd broke into discussion, some justifying their initial reactions, others softening, doubt shadowing their features. Jonas, who had been silent, shook his head and muttered, "We were quick to judge, too quick." The admission hung between them, heavy and raw. Amara, holding Elliot close, felt the stares shift from accusatory to questioning. She met the eyes of Lydia, a mother herself, who softened and stepped forward, voice low but carrying. Maybe we all need to think twice before jumping to conclusions. Finn's arm remained steady around Elliot as he spoke to the crowd. Families come in all forms. Love is what binds us, not what we look like. The crowd's collective silence held a tremor of realization, an uncomfortable truth surfacing that many couldn't yet voice. Delilah's throat tightened, the echo of her father's words no longer a comfort but a chain. The world felt off-kilter, spinning with the weight of what she had set in motion. Lyle stepped into the scene like a gust of wind, strong, purposeful, and unwavering. He had known Amara since their college days and had witnessed her journey through hardship, joy, and the quiet moments that defined true resilience. When news of the park incident reached him, he didn't hesitate. Lyle marched down the familiar streets to where a gathering had sprung up outside the neighborhood community center. The gathering buzzed with opinions, some sharp and biting, others tentative and curious. The air hummed with tension as voices competed for dominance, each one a thread of the fabric that held the community's divided perspective. Delilah stood at the edge, arms crossed, eyes distant as she listened. The guilt that had curled in her stomach now gnawed relentlessly, like a storm she couldn't quell. Lyle cleared his throat, and the noise ebbed like a tide. He met the eyes of those who turned to face him, his voice low and rich with conviction. I know everyone here has thoughts on what happened at the park. Some of you think Amara was suspicious simply because you didn't know her story. Let me tell you what you don't see. Amara is the person who runs into a downpour to help a neighbor with groceries, who volunteers late into the night at the shelter. Lyle continued, his eyes meeting Delilah's. She adopted Elliot, not just out of obligation, but out of boundless love. It's time we ask ourselves, why do we assume the worst? Delilah's gaze faltered. Each word struck a chord that resonated painfully, shaking the foundation of her certainty. Nearby, Mavis shifted uncomfortably, fingers picking at the frayed edge of her sweater. Jonas, who had been an observer until now, lifted his chin and spoke, voice measured. We all have our pasts, but holding onto them too tightly blinds us to what's right in front of us. I'm about to reveal the unexpected turns in this story. Before we do, a quick reminder to like and subscribe for more gripping narratives. The room fell silent as Lydia, who had previously defended Delilah's concerns, stepped forward. She looked at Delilah, her expression softening. Maybe we need to listen more and judge less, Lydia said quietly, eyes flicking toward Elliot, who stood close to Finn, watching with wide, innocent eyes. The weight of these words pressed on Delilah's chest. She remembered childhood evenings where her father sat at the kitchen table reciting tales laced with fear and mistrust. But those stories were cracked now, their foundation fragile in the face of reality. Finn, sensing the shift, spoke up. What happened at the park wasn't just an incident, it was a reflection of how easily we forget that understanding takes effort. This is our chance to do better. The crowd murmured in response, some nodding, others lost in thought. Delilah felt the chill of realization seep into her bones. She had been the one to make that call, the one to let fear override reason. But now, surrounded by friends, neighbors, and strangers bound by the echoes of this moment, she began to see the possibility of change, not just in others, but in herself. The neighborhood had become a living tableau of reflection and dialogue. Old alliances softened, new connections formed, and the voices that once clashed now wove a tentative symphony of understanding. The path forward was uncertain, but it was there, waiting. The phone call that Delilah made, meant only as a precaution in her mind, spiraled quickly beyond anyone's expectation. Within hours, Child Services had been notified. An investigator, Mrs. Leone, stern and matter of fact, appeared at Amara's doorstep. Amara's heart sank when she saw the official badge, Elliot clutching her leg as if sensing the storm on the horizon. Mrs. Leone explained the procedure, her words clinical and detached. Given the nature of the report, we need to ensure the safety and well-being of all involved. This is standard, but it's important. The words lingered, a harsh echo in the quiet of the small living room. Amara, usually composed, felt a tremor in her voice as she responded, "Elliot is my son. He is loved. Please, just see that." The investigator's expression didn't change, but she nodded curtly. As she interviewed Elliot, asking questions with a practiced softness, Amara's chest tightened. Outside, neighbors craned their necks, whispering behind fences and hedges. The whole ordeal played out like a slow public trial. Meanwhile, Finn decided that silence was no longer an option. He gathered a few of the community members at the local coffee house that evening, inviting them to share a moment of truth. "I think it's time to tell you all something," Finn began, voice steady but tinged with sorrow. He pulled out an old photo, its edges frayed. The image showed a young man with a broad smile and eyes that mirrored Finn's. "This is my brother, Aaron. He was a man who stood for justice, but he faced the same looks Amara faced yesterday, fearful, unwarranted." The room stilled, eyes on Finn as he continued, sharing how his brother had been misunderstood, labeled, and ultimately left to carry the burden of others' assumptions. "Aaron's story didn't end the way it should have," Finn said, voice breaking. "And I will not stand by and watch history rhyme itself." Across town, Delilah was beginning to feel the full impact of her actions. The whispers were no longer just in her head. They trailed her at the grocery store, where passing glances turned sharp and judgmental. Her friends, once eager to meet for morning coffee, now found reasons to cancel. It was Mavis who finally confronted her, eyes ablaze. "Delilah, what did you think would happen? Do you realize the weight of what you set in motion?" Delilah's breath caught in her throat, the defensive wall she'd built starting to crumble. "I was trying to." The excuse faltered as she saw the hurt in Mavis's expression. "I didn't know it would go this far." Mavis shook her head. "That's the problem. We act without thinking about who will pay the price." If you've been gripped by the story so far, show your support by hitting that like button and subscribing. It helps bring stories like these to light. The repercussions extended further than Delilah anticipated. The local newspaper ran an article detailing the incident, its headline unflinching, "Prejudice in Our Backyard." Letters to the editor flooded in, a mix of outrage, sympathy for Amara, and calls for Delilah to face consequences. Back at Amara's house, Mrs. Leone concluded her visit with a solemn nod. "We'll review everything, but I see no reason for immediate action," she said, turning to Elliot. "You're a lucky boy to have such a strong mom." The relief was palpable, but Amara knew it wasn't over. The storm had raged and left debris in its wake. Finn's story began to spread, stirring up old memories and unearthing truths that the community had tucked away for convenience. Delilah was left staring at the shattered image of herself, the cracks deepening each time she encountered a new consequence of her actions. The price of a choice made in a moment of ignorance was being paid by more than just her, and she knew that redemption, if possible, would demand more than just regret. It would require change. Delilah stood outside Amara's house, her hands trembling as she reached for the doorbell. It was a cold morning, the kind where the crisp air seemed to cut through any pretense or hesitation. The walk up to the house had felt like miles, each step weighed down by the realization of what she needed to do. She hadn't slept in days, haunted by the echoes of Mavis's words and the headline that seemed burned into her mind, "Prejudice in Our Backyard." Amara opened the door slowly, her eyes narrowing as she recognized Delilah. The warmth from inside spilled out, contrasting sharply with the frost in Delilah's expression. For a moment, neither woman spoke. The silence was taut, stretching between them like a taut wire ready to snap. Delilah cleared her throat, a small, hesitant sound. Amara, I don't know where to start. Amara stood firm, her face unreadable but her eyes fierce. Then start at the beginning, she said, voice steady but sharp. Delilah's composure faltered, and she looked down, unable to meet Amara's gaze. I let fear guide me. I thought I was protecting, but I didn't stop to think about who would be hurt. And now. You want forgiveness? Amara's voice was cool, with an edge of exhaustion. It wasn't a question, but a statement, laced with disbelief. Forgiveness doesn't erase what happened, Delilah. It doesn't take away the hours I spent trying to convince a stranger that I am fit to be my own son's mother. It doesn't erase the fear that Elliot felt, or the doubt in the eyes of people who once called me a friend. Delilah's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded, accepting the weight of Amara's words. I don't expect it, but I am sorry, truly, and I need to do better. I need to show that I've learned, not just say it. Amara sighed, a deep, weary sound that spoke of sleepless nights and battles fought alone. She looked at Delilah, really looked at her, and saw the cracks in her veneer, the guilt, the shame, the dawning understanding that had finally found its way to her eyes. Before Amara could respond, a small voice broke the tension. Why are you sad? Elliot's question cut through the cold air, his small face peering around the doorframe, eyes wide with innocence. Amara's expression softened as she looked at her son. She bent down, brushing a hand over his curls. We're not sad, sweetheart. We're talking. Delilah's breath hitched as she watched Elliot step forward, his eyes shifting from his mother to her. He reached out, a gesture so simple yet profound. He handed Delilah a small drawing, a crayon masterpiece of the park with the three of them, hand in hand. This is for you, he said, beaming with the pure, forgiving nature only a child could have. Tears slipped down Delilah's cheeks, and she took the drawing with trembling hands. The weight of guilt shifted, replaced by something else, a fragile, tentative hope. Thank you, Elliot, she whispered, her voice breaking. Amara's gaze softened as she watched the interaction. The lines of pain on her face didn't disappear, but they eased slightly. Elliot doesn't hold grudges, she said quietly. Maybe there's a lesson in that. Delilah looked up, eyes meeting Amara's with a blend of gratitude and understanding. I'm ready to learn. If you're still with me, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Your support means the world and keeps content like this coming. In that moment, the frost seemed to lift, replaced by the first rays of a thaw. It wouldn't be easy. Trust wasn't built in a day, nor was forgiveness given without earning it. But in that shared moment between three lives intertwined by an act of fear and an act of innocence, the path to something better began to take form. As Delilah turned to leave, a small smile appeared on Amara's lips, barely there, but real. Change had knocked on her door, and she was willing to let it in, on her own terms and at her own pace. And Delilah, holding a child's drawing as if it were a lifeline, understood that this was only the beginning. The news of the park incident rippled through the neighborhood long after the immediate tension had faded. It wasn't just gossip anymore. It was a mirror held up to each person, reflecting biases, assumptions, and truths too long ignored. At the community center, flyers began to appear on bulletin boards and in mailboxes, announcing a series of workshops aimed at fostering inclusivity and understanding. The first session was titled Unseen Voices, Listening Without Judgment. Delilah sat near the back at the first meeting, fingers gripping the edge of her chair as if it were the only thing keeping her steady. The room buzzed with a cautious mix of curiosity and apprehension. Some faces were familiar. Neighbors she'd greeted with a smile at the store, parents from the local school. Others, like Amara's friends, were strangers to her, their presence both a challenge and an invitation. A facilitator, a soft-spoken woman with sharp eyes named Carla, stepped forward. Welcome, everyone. Today we're here not just to speak, but to listen, to understand where we stand and, more importantly, where we can grow. Delilah felt the weight of eyes around her, but kept her focus ahead, determined to be present. The room shifted as Amara entered, a quiet strength in her stride. She met Delilah's gaze briefly, a moment that said, I see you, and then she sat with Lyle and another friend, their presence a testament to resilience. Discussions began, halting at first, hesitant. Stories surfaced. A mother shared how her daughter felt isolated at school. An older man admitted he hadn't realized the power of the words he used until now. Delilah listened, heart tightening, as Amara finally spoke. I've had to fight for a voice for as long as I can remember, Amara said, her voice unwavering yet vulnerable. But what happened made me realize that even when I'm fighting for my family, it doesn't mean I'm alone. There are others who need that voice too. She paused, looking at Elliot, who sat in the corner, doodling peacefully. And it's not just for us, but for them, for their future. Delilah's throat burned with unshed tears. She raised her hand, drawing a few surprised glances. I made a mistake, one rooted in fear, in ignorance. But I'm here because I need to learn to do better, not just for myself, but for all of us. The silence was profound. Carla nodded, a small smile lifting her lips. Acknowledgement is the first step, Delilah. Growth comes from what we do next. Over the weeks, the workshops flourished. They became more than lessons, they turned into connections. People who had only nodded politely on the street began having real conversations. Delilah found herself sharing stories with Amara during breaks, tentative at first, but gradually easing into shared moments of laughter and understanding. Amara's life, too, began to shift. Support came from unexpected places, a kind word from a shop owner, an invitation to join a community project. With Lyle's help, she started a small support group for adoptive parents, a place where they could share experiences and strategies. Each meeting was a testament to her strength, and Elliot thrived in the warmth of a growing network that celebrated him. One day, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with hues of gold, Delilah found herself walking beside Amara after a meeting. The air was still, filled with the quiet sounds of leaves rustling and children playing nearby. Amara, Delilah said, voice soft but sure, thank you for allowing me to be part of this. Amara turned to her, eyes searching, but what she found was genuine. It takes more than one voice to change a story, Delilah, and this is just the beginning. The community found strength, not just in its differences, but in the willingness to face them head on, to stumble, learn, and rebuild. A notice went up announcing the start of a community festival celebrating heritage and unity, spearheaded by none other than Amara and Delilah together. The neighborhood wasn't perfect, but it was moving towards something better, a place where stories were shared, voices were heard, and change was embraced. The warm, late spring sun bathed the park in golden light, casting long shadows across the grass. Banners fluttered gently in the breeze, each one bearing a word that had become a pillar of the community's journey: understanding, resilience, unity. The park, once a stage for division, had transformed into a symbol of togetherness, alive with the hum of conversation, the laughter of children, and the sound of music playing softly in the background. A makeshift stage stood at the center, adorned with flowers donated by a local nursery and handcrafted decorations from the neighborhood kids. Amara stood at the edge, adjusting Elliot's bow tie while Lyle and a few other friends looked on, beaming with pride. Delilah was nearby, her face a mix of anticipation and humility, holding a small, handwritten speech in her trembling hands. The event began with a welcome from Carla, the facilitator who had sparked countless moments of reflection and growth within the workshops. Her voice, strong and kind, carried across the park. Today, we gather not just to celebrate, but to acknowledge how far we've come, and to remind ourselves that change is not a moment, it's a movement. The crowd erupted in applause, and Amara stepped forward. She glanced at Elliot, who gave her a thumbs up, and then began to speak. A few months ago, I would never have imagined standing here, surrounded by so many of you who have become like family. What started as a day filled with fear and uncertainty became the catalyst for something powerful, an opportunity for change. Elliot, sensing his moment, tugged at her dress. She smiled, picked him up, and held him close. This little boy taught me that even in moments of misunderstanding, love and hope can rebuild bridges, and that's what we're doing now. Amara's words resonated, bringing some to tears and others to silent nods of agreement. Delilah's turn followed. She stepped onto the stage, the paper shaking in her grasp. Clearing her throat, she found Amara's eyes in the crowd and took a deep breath. When we let fear guide our actions, we create walls. But when we're brave enough to face that fear and listen, truly listen, we find doors instead. Delilah said, voice wavering but steady. I'm here because I chose to open those doors. And today I want to thank Amara, Elliot, and all of you for teaching me that it's never too late to change. A symbolic gesture followed as Delilah handed Amara a small, hand-carved wooden bird, a nod to the day everything began. Amara's eyes softened and she accepted it, knowing it was more than just an object, it was a promise. The event continued, filled with speeches from community members who shared stories of newfound connections and realizations. Children painted murals of hands joined together, and families took part in games that mixed traditions from different cultures. As the day drew to a close, a final speech was given by Finn. He spoke of the lessons learned, the strength of the human spirit, and the hope that this story would inspire beyond their community. Today marks a new chapter, he said, his voice carrying a tone of optimism. A chapter where we choose to write stories together, not apart. With that, the event concluded with the release of paper lanterns, each bearing a wish or a word of hope written by someone in the community. As the lanterns floated upward, their glow mingled with the deepening twilight, casting reflections of light and promise across the park. Delilah and Amara stood side by side, watching as the lanterns became dots in the sky. There was no need for words. The silence between them spoke of forgiveness, understanding, and the first steps toward healing. Thank you for staying till the end. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the perfect time. And don't forget to drop your comments. Stay tuned for more stories that make you think, reflect, and feel.